I'm glad to see so many people here, and I hope you enjoy this talk. We have Chris Hines here and John Mendelson. Test. Is it still the same? It's better? Yeah, the sound is better. Yeah? It's better now. Okay. Can I ask John to introduce Chris?
There's one of the biggest suffering here. But according to this talk, some media strict, because then the stuff that I was to talk about was just boring and inappropriate, I thought, in the context you can hear about mine. So, Chris and I quick chat yesterday, and I'm glad we agreed how we're not going to be part of this talk. But I did want to take an opportunity to introduce Chris. So I'm on my own here, and he has nothing to say. Introduce Chris. I've known Chris on and off for a good number of years. That's maybe 20 years. Chris is one of a kind, and I say that in a very nice way. There are very few people who are broad-minded, experienced, open-minded, and there's a difference between being broad and open-minded. As Chris being in the bush, being camping out, or being birding, or walking around with Chris is just a total pleasure. And you won't have that pleasure with many people. So what Chris will offer to you tonight comes from lots of open eyes, open minds, a lot of thinking about Angola and about birds. The other thing that I like to do is this it's really on the back of what Chris is as a natural, I'd call him a natural historian par excellence. There are lots of people who float around the world with lots of degrees, and they're specialists in this and specialists in that. But they, without being derogatory, there's a lot of narrow-mindedness in specialists just on one thing. And there's very little thinking about the bigger picture. And for those of us who are interested in birds, of course, live in the bush, in forests and wetlands, so they're part of a bigger picture, sort of picture of natural history. So you'll see some really crazy special birds here. But just bear in mind that they're part of a bigger system of environmental pollutions, grasslands, and so on. And I guess some of us old guys are a little cynical about the trichy that goes on. It is so pervasive these days. There's much more to birds than just twitching and taking them off on your life. There's a whole bunch of stuff out of there, and you will hear some of that. So, Chris, over to you. Anything rude about you?
I think John's borrowing time here. So I'll say read things about you. Cool. Okay. Thanks, John. Yeah, I was very lucky, just a little bit of context here, I was very lucky to live in Angola for 8 years. And I wasn't working as a biologist there, I was teaching at the international school, my wife was the head of school. So, as you do, it's nepotism works and I had a job. Anyway, the best part of the thing was that we actually were able to get out of Rwanda. We worked in Rwanda, we were able to get out of Rwanda very regularly. And after a bit of exploration in the first year or so, we realized that it was an incredibly safe place to go and travel. there's landmine areas and that sort of stuff. The local people tell you where those are, and it became obvious to us that it was a great place to travel and it was very safe. And so I was very lucky. I spent many, many weekends and many of our holidays just traveling around the country. And then we met some local Angolan people who became interested in this, and you see a lot of their photographs. We keep it on file, and Rogério Pereira, and I met up with John up there again. His son was working there, and so there was a little gang of people who were really interested in getting out and about. And it was a real pleasure. And one of the things was a gobsmacking place. I mean, I always said, you kick the bush, and there was going to be something new. It was either new to science or new to you or a range extension or whatever it was. It was incredible. And I'll go through some of the science that has happened and all that sort of thing in Angola. But first off, let's just have a look at. I'm just having fun. You want to see if this thing works. No. So we'll just go back to. Just over time. Technology is wonderful.
Is it talking about
Okay. Okay. So that thing. Angola scope is huge. It's about 1,300 kilometers north to south, and it's about 1,200 kilometers east to west. And the thing about Angola, and I'll show you some of the stuff in a minute, is that it encompasses everything from one of the driest deserts in the world. Down in the southwestern corner is the Namibia. It's just across the road from Kawakufu. And then up on the there you can see in lines the Congo at the top. That's tropical rainforests. Right, you're in the middle of the Congo rainforest. Up there, and these areas here also Guinea Congolese forests. It's the seventh largest country in Africa, and the thing that you got to keep in mind when we're going through this stuff is that it's the topography of this country and the climate that determines this incredible diversity of habitats. And you can see the highlands through the western part of the country up here. All right, these are very high mountains, and that escarpment runs through up into the southern DRC, and there are outliers on the way. This area here is all Kalahari sands, and it's a big plateau at about anywhere between 1,000 and 1,200 meters. The rainfall is again quite markedly different. Down in the southwestern corner there, you can see it's less than 100 millimeters of rain. And then you get up to the top of the mountains around Palma, and you're looking at about 1,700 millimeters of rain. And then up on the DRC border there, again, you're looking at a tremendous amount of rain. So there's this latitudinal shift in rainfall up in the north of the country. It's the rainfall environment, pretty much like East Africa. There's a short wet season and there's a long wet season, with a little dry season in between. And that's because of the shift of the intertropical convergence zone that comes up and down north and south there. And that has a major influence on allowing many of the tropical species to come into Angola. So we're looking at a real mix, and this was recognized a long time ago, a real mix of arid zone stuff, but bounding onto onto the West African Congo Basin stuff that's coming down from the north. So there's a lot of different species, a lot of really exciting stuff. In the winter, the country, particularly in the western side of the country, is covered in what is called Kasimu. And this is a really, you think you're in Walvis Bay, all right? But this is 100 kilometers inland. This is at the top of the center of the Kandahar, and it's just thick fog all the time. And it's a really important aspect of the biology of these areas. And this Kasimu sits for months and months and months and months. Right? And then suddenly it clears, and you get tropical rainstorms that were pretty spectacular. Right? And you don't want to spend a lot of time out here at this time of the year because it gets very sudden and very quickly. This is a very generalized map of some major vegetation units. Here, this grey stuff is largely Niombo. Okay, that's the important Niombo woodlands, and those are mostly based on Kalahari sand soils. And then you can see 43 and 42 are these big patches of tropical rainforests. And you have an odd, this 81 is a very odd band of baobab and euphorbia-dominated habitats in the dry areas to the western side of the escarpment. And the only bit that will be familiar to Namibians is this bit down in the south, which is essentially like here, the Rhodesian teak woodlands, all right? They're on the sand dunes, and then you've got the Nama habitats down there in the southwestern corner. Sorry, excuse me. The key area here is this area that's marked out in the roughly in red here. This is the escarpment. And if you look at where the escarpment is relative to these different habitats, you'll see the wet stuff comes in from the east and meets the dry stuff that's coming in from the west. And that, I guess, evolutionary tension, if you wanted, for want of a better word, drove incredible levels of evolution and speciation. And it's along this escarpment that you'll, well, I don't know actually, but my little noggin blew its top in this area because it was just incredible. The amount of the diversity of habitats, the diversity of animals, plants, birds, whatever, it was just incredible. And right there, we could see tremendous amounts of numbers of really interesting endemic species. And fortunately, we had some pretty good recent studies down there. John did a whole publication on it. I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. But Brian Huntley also consolidated a lot of information, and that gave us a lot of insight into what we were looking at. All right, this endemism and diversity here is just incredible, and so we started seeing things coming to light post peace. Right, in about 1998, things started quietening down, and then by the time I got there in around 2011, things were very much quieter, and then biologists were able to get out into the field. This is a newly described Naha, okay, a Galago, new to science, completely new to science, and it was discovered in 2014, around about there, okay, and that's in the tropical forests in the central part, on the escarpment. But in the south, you start getting all these really interesting things. This is one of the Rocktropus, one of the day geckos. This is endemic to the Serra da Michela, which is down in the south, near Luanda. okay, on a big rocky escarpment there. And it only occurs there. And then you can do some really exciting things, and you can find this. This is a red crescent taraka. It's endemic to these forests, extremely limited distribution, and there is nothing quite the same anywhere else in Africa to this. It's like an isolated taraka. The other things that we were there, we saw tremendous amounts of were these smaller forest birds. This is Brown's bushshrike. It's very closely related to a thing in East Africa called Luder's bushshrike. And Luder's bushshrike is in Tanzania, all right? And its closest relative is Brown's bushshrike, which sits in Angola. And we also have the Bella bushshrike, which is very similar to this as well. So these little isolated populations over time evolved into new species. So it's pretty exciting scratching around looking for it. So one of the things I started looking at is I have a very special, I have a lot of interest in butterflies and dragonflies actually. And one of the recent publications, which is from Brian Humphrey, is somebody put together a paper within that book about where the collections were from. And as you can see, the Portuguese, and it wasn't just the Portuguese, people like Velvich and Rossweiler and all the famous botanists actually spent most of their time in Angola. Velvich didn't come to Namibia. If he came to Namibia, it was for a little short period of time. Velvich is described from Angola. The Velvich sat there for years and just collected tens of thousands of specimens and things. And so you can see the plants make up the vast majority of the collections here. And some areas are pretty well represented in these collections. So there's 15,000 specimens from BA province. Why? It's because there's big towns there, and it's a very comfortable place to sit, and there were nice farms, and you could go to the fazenda as the local, as the scientist for the museum, and you'd park off and you'd be feted and fed. All right? Where they didn't go, and you can see it right up there at the top, up in Zaire province, right up against the DRC border, 807 specimens were collected there in nearly 200 years of scientific exploration. Right? And so you can see that there were massive areas that were just hugely under-collected and underrepresented in any of these museums. Okay, this little 5,801 is a little oddity, right, for that northern area. And that's because the diamond mining company that worked up there way back, Portuguese era, they funded a museum, and they funded a guy to set up that museum, and he collected a lot of stuff. And that's why that has that thing there. This is the collecting intensity for Angola from 1750 to well into the 2000s here. And you can see that not much happened for the first 100 years, and then there was a little bit of activity as the botanists got in there in the late 1800s. And then through the Portuguese era, it was kind of boom and bust. And then towards the end of the Portuguese era, in the late 60s and very early 70s, there was a lot of activity. Right? And then through the 35 years of civil war, it flatlined completely. And so when I got there, it was so exciting because it was just all new. And whatever you did was regarded as interesting. So I got pretty excited with that. This is the collecting grids for all the butterflies, right, from the 19th century to the present day. And you can see that not much collecting was done. This is based on museum specimens, right? Huge parts of the country. Come on, must be better for birds, yeah? All right? These are the bird records from eBird plus all the museum records. Right? You can see that not much work had been done in this country. So it's all pretty well unknown. In recent years, there have been a flurry of interesting books coming out of there. This is, what's his name? D'Souza Bouvier. He put this together. And they've actually just published the second volume of that. And then the two books that I really cannot recommend enough are these two books. The one on the left is a little bit more sciencey and a bit tougher to read, okay? But if you're a scientist and you want the source material, this is where you go. Right? Brian took that book and translated it into layman's terms for this ecology of Angola. And it's a great volume. It's available free online, and there's a tremendous amount of information and really good writing about ecology, biodiversity, conservation issues, all those sorts of things. And I can highly recommend it. John put this together. It's an excellent book. There's some really nice papers in this. It's a little more, it's a little sciencey for the lay reader, okay, but there's some great papers in there, and I really can recommend, if you're interested in the stuff, please just get hold of this. This is available free online as well. Okay. So we've done all this sort of history and background, a little bit of science and that sort of stuff. That's where it ends, folks. All right. Now we're getting straight into the exciting part, and that's all the bits and pieces that I was lucky enough to see. Down in the south, we have welwitschers, and you have no idea. Like Namibia is very proud of its welwitschers. Okay. I'll tell you what, Angola, it's just, you can go to places and it's just fields and fields and fields, like kilometers of welwitschers. And there's big ones, there's little ones, it's just unbelievable. But it's pretty much the same. This area is very similar to Namibia, and there's a couple of swinglock there. This is down in the Luana area, some of the old mountains there, but it's very recognizable for us in Namibia. Okay, nothing really different there. But as you go closer to the escarpment, things change. These dry riverbeds come off these high mountains and scour out these riverbeds, and these are mapanis on the side of the river here, and it's things start changing, but it is mapani and it's kind of dull in a way. But there are endemic rivers here. Right? We're starting to see things like Benguela long-tailed starlings, which is similar to Neves starling, but is a different color, of course, different things, etc. I'm not sure that it's been elevated to species status. I don't know. But as you go further north in this dry zone, you start getting these really interesting erosion surfaces. This is the Mendelsohn, which is just south of Luanda, and you get these tropical laterite soils which drain very, very easily, and they're sands essentially, and they drain, and then you've got this massive area of bleached soils below. Terrible, terrible agricultural potential, but really pretty. And it's here that you start picking up some of the endemics that, because you're starting to look at the dry areas that are boundary on the bumping up against the escarpment. All right. And this is what I was telling you about earlier. This is these white trees are baobabs. Okay, and they covered that Kasimbu causes massive deposition of dew at night, right, the fog, and the trees are completely covered in these white lichens. And so when they're leafless, they look like this. It's incredible. And you can go to areas and there's almost nothing other than baobabs. They're so dense, all right? And the long, skinny baobabs. There's no fat baobabs in these areas, okay? And then you can see up at the top, all right, those are the euphorbias. Euphorbia conspicuum. Why is it called conspicuum? Anyway, it's very typical of areas just south of Rwanda and all the way up almost to Sube on the Congo River. All right, we get a whole bunch of species that are recognizable to us. White-tailed shrikes in the south. I have seen white-tailed shrikes on the ground and marina trogons in the trees. All right, so it's that kind of weirdness there. Okay, this is I wanted to make this change its name. It used to be Orange River Franklin, which has been shot and been moved into a new species. I think it's this is Canadian Franklin. Okay, yeah, okay. And then you start looking at how is it released in the butterflies. This is a small orange tip. This same species occurs in Namibia in quite large numbers at certain times in the year. All right, and this is one of the bush scholars, Axiophytes, and the same sort of thing. So then you get slightly different habitats. And in the mangrove forests along the rivers, this is little spotted woodpecker. I think this species has now been cut away. Little spotted woodpecker. Little spotted woodpecker is now called only to East Africa, and this is called green banded or something. It's a chocolate change to his name. And then you see some really cool birds like this. Right? This is blue-breasted kingfisher. Absolutely stunning, very similar to woodland, but you can see the bill color and the wing colors are quite different, and it's definitely got a blue breast. Okay. The thick-billed beavers, grosbeak beavers, completely different subspecies there. Right? It's not the dull, this is a male, it's not just a big dull brown bird, it's got this pretty chestnut hair and all this manipulation underneath. All right. Root-style palm thrush, hardy swordraptor on the Canadian River. This bird is trash in Angola. It's everywhere. It bred on my balcony on the fourth floor of a building, and that sort of thing. They're they are everywhere. And it's a fantastic bird. You get used to the song, and it's just fantastic. This is an Angola mantis. Fairly similar to chinspike. Okay, highly restricted. White-fronted wattle eyes. Another sort of tropical forest type group, the wattle eyes. Only in southern Africa, only from the eastern, some of the wattle eyes only down the eastern side, but in the tropical rainforest they go right the way across to the western side. It's the Gabela helmet shrike. Very, very localized, specialized species. It sits on the boundary of those weird baobab euphorbia forests and going a little bit to the west, but it doesn't get into the wet forests. It likes the dry stuff. And another bird that does like the dry stuff is Angola pitta. Very distinctive call, very actually quite easy to find at certain times of the year. If you want to go and see one of these things, you have to go in November. That's when they're calling, and that's when they are most active. But relatively easy to find, and breeding at relatively high densities. My friend and I, we came across these things by mistake in a forest called Kambono, and we found 5 nests within about 500 meters. They're all sitting there in this very distinctive type of habitat, and they're all sitting there shouting at each other and doing their displays, all very close together. Okay, so that's the western side of the country, and it's narrow, it's about 150 kilometers wide, at its widest point. But we're going to flip right over the escarpment to the Miombo, which looks like this. It's a very typical Miombo structure, big tall trees, dominated by a couple of species of trees, and then a distinctive layer of grass below. A lot of fires go through these systems, they're fire determined, and it's a system that is tied up with these terrible soils. And anything that lives there is kind of specialized in living, because you've got to eat lousy food every day. All right? And so herbivore numbers are relatively low, but things like roan antelope historically occurred in quite large numbers in these areas. Giant sable, and a range of species like that. And then there's a range of birds that are specialists in this habitat as well. Right? But birds are few and far between. All of them, all these animals, whether it's from butterflies all the way through to large animals like giant sable, they're pretty specialized in this habitat, right? And there's not a lot of them. So it gets a little long if you're looking for lots of excitement, but it's not quite as exciting as you. There's a lot of interesting stuff there, but it comes slowly. As you hit the escarpment, so the Miombo changes its structure, species, and composition completely, because the rainfall increases as you go up the mountains, and the temperatures decrease markedly. The top of these mountains is cold. And this slide shows the montane Miombo, and this is where the really exciting butterflies are. It's this boundary between these two habitats. And then in the southwestern part of the country, southeastern part of the country, you get these very distinctive forests called cryptocephalon forests. And again, it's a remarkable type of habitat. Like 1 or 2 species dominate the system. There's moss on the ground permanently. It's like green mossy beds. It's all wet and soggy in there, and that sort of thing. And there's again, it's pretty slow in terms of birds and insects and things like that, but it is very exciting. Right? Down in the south, you get a number of these big rivers that go through this Miombo, and this is where you start getting some of the tropical species that get washed down the river occur in these little riparian forests. And then as you get further down, this is the Rio Queb, and the Queb goes into the Congo. Is that correct? Yeah? Into the Congo. Okay, so anyway, this is the Rio Queb, and you can see it's very flat, and so you get these massive meanders across the landscape like this. There's a very distinctive area of wetland habitats, and then you get these patches of sort of degraded Miombo that sort of come along the edge of these wetlands, and there you can see the big Miombo forests in the background that are not influenced by these rivers at all. So you get these very distinct habitats and things. And again, fantastic butterflies in particular. But we get many birds that we are interested a lot, that we are interested in Namibia, because this is where they occur. Sharp-tailed starlings, it's a common bird in these woodlands up there. The reason we get it is because those woodlands come very close to the Namibian border. Okay? This is one of the pretty skippers. This is Southern Paradise skipper, the white-cloaked skipper, I think is its common name. Things like Susan's trot. Okay? Very, it's not common anywhere, but it's relatively easy to find in these habitats. Okay, and then you get really cool little guys like this. White-tailed blue flycatchers, very pretty little thing, constantly on the move, clearing its tail, just looking cute up there in the next one. Anchieta's sunbird. Anchieta was an early collector in Angola. He was a Portuguese guy, and he must have been a tough one because he got all over the place. In the very early days, he collected This is named after him. And there's Anchiatus python and many other Anchiatus, all right? And this is Anchiatus barbat, right? And again, this is very interesting for me. It was interesting for me because there's a thing in the Miombo just to the east called white spot, which occurs through Zambia and Zimbabwe and in the Miombo there. It looks very similar to this, but it's clearly different. So speciation has taken place because of certain barriers between these populations. And I've never seen any real analysis of this stuff, but it's pretty, from a biological point of view, I'm not quite excited. All right, this is Aphiodinia, one of the really cool little butterflies in these Miombo areas. On the boundary of the Miombo and these other these wetter forests, you get this weird bird, all right? I think it's still one of these birds that gets shoved between groups. This is called a black-collared bulbul, but nobody's sure that it's a bulbul, and some people say they think it's a shrike and blah, 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 okay? So there's a bit of that, okay? Babylon sunbird, very cool looking sunbird, big thing in these slightly wetter Miombo areas. And then in the very wet areas of these forests, you get particular wet forests on the drainage lines, and these are called Mashitus. And on the Mashitu, you get up in the northeastern side, you get this thing. This is a very large robin chat. It's bigger than a Karoo thrush, right? And it's very cool, right? And they occur in a little population in Angola, and then I don't know whether it's a real gap or whether it's a sampling gap, and there's a big gap, and there's a tiny population known from the southwestern corner of the DRC. So there's this big gap where these things occur in Angola. It's a relatively accessible habitat. As you head into onto the escarpment, you come to the Serra da Shell, and this is the level pass of the Serra da Shell. And you can see the big discontinuity between high altitude areas, and mostly dominated by grasslands and some open patches of montane Miombo, and it drops off 800 meters or so down into the mountain. And along this escarpment, you get lots of speciation, particularly well known in things like lizards and all the lizards and things. But it's lovely and it is spectacular. This is at Tundabala, just outside of Longo, and looking down and to the north along the edge of the escarpment. Massive drop-offs, very interesting areas. It's a nice butterflies. This is one of the policemen. And then, I jumped to, this is Ludwig's sunbird, endemic to the escarpment. There is, for some reason, and I haven't seen anybody's explanation, there is a tiny population of these things in eastern Zambia. And I think they go across into Malawi, but I think it's a different species. Why would it not be a continuous population? Angolan cave chats, endemic to these rocky outcrops on the escarpment. And then up high in the top of these mountains is you get Afro-montane forests. This is the Serra, this is Serra da Namba, or Namba Mountain. And you get these high altitude grasslands with little patches of Miombo here in the foreground. This is all Miombo. But up here in these areas that are protected from fire and are south facing, these are Afro-montane forests. And the birds in there, the nearest next place with the same species is the East African Arc Mountains. All right, things like orange thrush, bar-tailed trovers, all these really amazing birds. Right. So, like in evolutionary terms, in geological timescales, these forests were at one time connected to the East African forests. Right? And then climate changes and uplift and shifts in climate weather patterns and that sort of stuff resulted in these mountains getting cut off. And it's up here that you actually start getting other endemics. There's a whole bunch of endemic butterflies, and I'll show you in a minute. There's some other very exciting endemics. Up here you get a little thing called Finch's Franklin. I'm probably one of the toughest birds I've ever had to see. Not Katie came up here in Angola once to visit me up there, and when you were just walking along, that's just a near-death experience for Katie. Swiss Franklin, again, some highly specialized species, only occurs in these rocky outcrops in these relatively high altitude areas. I think it's Swiss with spur actually, it's not Franklin. And this is fairly closely related to heart valves. Same sort of behavior, like these big open bouldery areas, climbs up on the top to crawl, that sort of thing. All right. And then I was going to tell you some pretty exciting dragonflies here. This is one of the centers of endemism of dragonflies in western southern Africa. These mountains. This is Umapenia. This only occurs on like 3 or 4 streams in the hills above Rwanda. Right? And then while I was knocking around at Namba, I came across this thing, right? And I got really excited because I thought it was one of these there's a series of North American species called pennants, and I thought this was, wow, we found an American pennant here, this is going to be really exciting, that sort of thing. Fortunately, we got some photographs, all right? And then I had my little son there, and he was playing with his toys in the river, and the horse box or something went floating off the river. Yeah. And I ran back, caught his horse box, came back, and this thing was gone. This is a new species to science. Right? The dragonfly guys said, "You got to be joking. Like, this is nonsense. You got this picture from such and such a place, you made it up, whatever it is." I said, "No, well, there's a couple of us in the photographs of it. Yeah, there were a whole range." Anyway, you discovered a new species of dragonfly. Okay. The interesting thing is that about Namba is that it has a lot of Namibian connections. The Chapman family, which is now they were always based in the Wallace area, right? They bought the original farms when James Chapman was a big deal in Portuguese administration up to about the 1950s. They bought the original farm and they established a home there and became a center of scientific inquiry. It was the place to go if you were on a scientific expedition, because the Chapmans were very, very well educated and they welcomed all these people to come and visit. And that's why many of these endemic species, the source material, the type specimens come from this particular area. And Chapman then got really angry with the Portuguese because they kicked out the Mendelsohn trekkers. The Portuguese kicked the Mendelsohn trekkers out. And Chapman had spent a lot of time organizing the Mendelsohn trekkers to set up these trade routes, and the road system in Angola was based, right now, is based on the original trade routes that these Mendelsohn trekkers had originally put in. They used to move cattle from Lubango, which is way in the south, up to the diamond thing, Namibians, right up in the northeastern corner of the DRC border. They used to trek cattle up through there. They were remarkable people. Chapman got angry, and there was a family there called Rock. The same family that is here in Namibia. It's very well represented. The other half of the family had a trading empire in Angola, and they are still there, right? Anyway, they bought that farm, and the farmhouse, when I visited that area, was referred to as, I'm trying to, German local, the crazy German. Okay, German local. And so that's when they established that farm. They kept it going until late 1950s, 1960s, I think, and then they moved out of that area. Just ran cattle. Nobody lived on that farm anymore. All right. Again, we're going back to the escarpment, and this is a famous area called Convira, which is bounded by this big rocky escarpment and big forests, beautiful areas, and this type of forest stretches way, well, sort of from the central areas way up into the northern parts of the country. And it's here that you start getting the West African influences and tropical forest influence, the rainforest influences start coming into these habitats. Right? Big rocky outcrops in these areas, grasslands, tropical grasslands. These are the worst things you've ever worked in. Right? Don't ever volunteer to go and do work in these tropical grasslands up in northern Angola. The asphalums and sorghums and things like that, maybe 3-4 meters high, 4 meters high. It's like walking through a reed bed with itchy powder. It's not nice stuff, right? And there is nothing in it. That's the exciting part. Nothing. Okay? After about 2 or 3 attempts, I just gave up. I never went anywhere near it. Okay? These big grasslands in front of this area is going to get burned. And again, you've got these normal type forests there, and then up on these slopes you get these more tropical type of forests. This is how we went around there. You literally just drove around, and if you wanted to stop, you just found a little way to get off the road, and you set up a camp like this in the bush, and nobody ever gave us hassles, ever, in 8 years of mucking around. You start getting these really nice tropical rainforest species, more commonly associated with East African forests. This is great blue turako. This is a bird that's about twice the size of a grey goat. And it's bright blue and yellow. It's mind-blowing. Blue-throated roller, very closely related. It's the tropical forest version of broad-billed roller. And then you get these incredible outbreaks of these butterflies. This is a butterfly called an African snout. And at certain times of the year, certain species of butterflies will aggregate in their millions. Okay? Let me show you a quick little video here. This is my mate Bruce. Right? And here we are. And these butterflies are just flying around in there. Those grey areas are all butterflies, but they're all down in the dip area, right? Waiting, feeding on the salt. And this is typical of these forest systems. It's like there'd be nothing at all for long periods of time, and then bam, all of a sudden there were just millions and millions of butterflies. And it was, there were snouts who do this, and there were other things. I don't know what the common names are, but many of the skippers, and there were a group called gliders, and at certain times of the year there would be glider outbreaks. There were just thousands of these cream-colored butterflies just flying around the forests, all sorts of exciting things. Okay, so it's the same thing. And then, so you're like, I got pretty excited about the butterflies there because they are the tropical West African and Congo basin butterflies coming into that area of Angola. This is one of the foresters, okay, and then things like this giant blue Caraxes. Brown's bushpike, as I showed you earlier, this is a bird that occurs on the edge of these forested areas. Within these forests, you get this very, very sexy little bird called a yellow-throated wattle-eye. All right, and that picture doesn't actually do justice to the color of the eye. That is an iridescent sort of apple green turquoise color. I don't know what it's. Only a bird could have that on. All right. These are black. This is a black cast wattle hornbill. This is it's almost as big as a ground hornbill. Right? Massive things. These things are taking a lot of strain right now because of the deforestation of some of these areas. The Chinese logging and Portuguese logging also a big problem there. All right. This is green-headed sunbird, a bird that's restricted to these wet tropical forests. All right. Yeah, red-rumped tinkerbirds, hardlouse duck. It's a specialized forest duck. Right? It only occurs in these tiny little ponds in the middle of these forests. And then white-bellied tree pangolins, very commonly seen in meat markets. Huge trade in these things. Highly sought after because a lot of Chinese people in Angola and they're buying these. They will get the equivalent of nearly $1,000. If you're a poor person living in the forests, and trying to eke an existence, you got one of these. You get nearly $1,000 from a Chinese person because they can sell that thing on into the global pangolin trade and make a lot of money. Anyway, I'll move on from that sad story. Yellow-browed Mikator. Okay, one of these birds, you hear it all the time, hardly ever see it. White-spotted flufftails, a bird you get everywhere in the forest and you almost never see. And then some cool bonnets. Right? This is a yellow-billed bonnet, maybe a bit bigger than the crested bonnet, but it's purple and yellow. Very odd-looking bird. One of the blood gliders, this is Simon Furry. And then Zelchinian, one of the accurate type butterflies. The thing you should notice is some of these flowers, and that is Chromalina. It's one of the worst invasive plants ever to come into Africa. It was introduced to Southern. Right? It has made its way up through most of Angola already. Right? And it's everywhere, all over Angola. I can't remember the name of the natives in the local people who are the local farmers who do these small-scale farms in the forest there, but they call it something that translates roughly into death of the fields. I won't put them on. Yeah. Anyway, and then you see some this is a handpick. This is a wax. But it lives, it's sort of an handpick. It lives in the bottom of the forest and it eats ants with its wax. All right, and it doesn't have a wax-filled bee, but it's a wax-filled. All right, this is one of the green Caraxes, one of the green emperors. All right, and then there's a never-ending stream of these really cool butterflies. This is another one of the Caraxes, and this is the Caraxes to see. This is Zinga, the Zinga emperor, and it was just it's huge, and it's pretty. Okay. Green Taracos, this is a tropical West African species. It comes down into the Congo Basin and then comes down into Angola, right? red crested tobacco. You can't get enough of these things. They're a very, very cool bird. I'm not going to spend any time on the next couple of slides. I'll go through some very brief things. I've got to take up one of the slides, so I'll just do one minute. Okay. The protected areas of Angola historically were just big areas where nobody lived. There was no formal conservation structure really. It wasn't very well organized organization. And by the time the Angolan rule there collapsed in the 70s, they were only just starting to look at conservation as a strategy rather than just as setting aside some areas where, the way I understand it is rich, the powerful administrators had hunting rights. Okay? And Brian Humphrey was instrumental. But all of these parks originally fell under the Department of Veterinary Services. And it was only when Brian Humphrey went up there to work in the late 19, he started in the early 70s. By the time he got going, the whole thing collapsed. So no real conservation strategy there, and many of these areas are already occupied by thousands of people, so they've gone away. Land clearance, as you can see, is a big issue in these Namibia woodlands, but people are poor and they have to live somehow. It must be one of the most fire affected countries in Africa. Okay, everywhere in the winter you see these fires. Okay, and then this is John put this map together, but you can see that there's as line developments happen, so you get linear developments and massive changes in the habitats along those roads. It's orange and yellow stuff, and the blue areas are cleared, so increasing, and then there are lots of fire affected areas here. Okay, particularly in the southeastern corner. But we'll end on a happy note. This is a superb sunbird, and for me, this is was the bird that sort of symbolized Angola for me. Everything about Angola for me as a biologist was superb. All right, that's it. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, John will answer them. Just got to have a bit.
Are there any questions?
You still got it. I haven't eaten for a while. I'll go tomorrow. But I can't get my dance class on. I have children at home. Yes.
We had that transport recently in the microphone 2 weeks ago. And I was in a way saying, okay, we didn't look too much in it, we were driving a lot. Yeah. And I was at some point saying, I don't see any birds, I don't see any animals. What we saw in animals was hanging dead next to the road. It was a steel bogey, it was a big rat, nothing else. Yeah, and I was really shocked a little bit about that. It's dirty. And what I'm also shocked is red tooth finding. Prickly bear. It's a disaster. It is up to we were up to the Binga Falls. Yeah. And if you go into this forest area, if you look closely, you see the prickly bear. I don't know how the people still can move in there and get the bananas and the pawpaws from the trees. It is a severe disaster, the prickly bears in that area, I would say. But I was, shocked. I felt like, I said, okay, and no birds. It was all eaten up.
You're absolutely right. Animals, like mammals in that country. Everything, but then you have to put it in context, right? And I'm not making an excuse for anything, but they years of civil war, right, where people were severely displaced and they got hammered. You know, they couldn't build a life for themselves. They couldn't build any, no planning structures. There's no support structures from government, all that sort of stuff. And so people just had to survive as best they could. And they, you know, where do you get your protein from? Well, that animal always costs. Everywhere you go in Angola, you see these giant cane rats for sale in the markets, right? And they're big things. And they weigh about 1.5 kilos, right? You know, that's the dressed one, right? And you go walking around and you find traps for them. And it's not a simple little trap. It's a whole tree that's been cut down and build a whole structure in these giant grasslands, and they feed these things around a certain area, and then the animal will pull a tiny little string, and this whole tree will fall down and food. But they struggle to survive. But people have struggled to survive for all this time, and their protein source is the wild animals there. The prickly pear stuff is a disaster, particularly down near Benguela and in the south, in the drier parts. The stuff has just taken over the entire area. So if you see prickly pears anywhere here, chop it down and burn it. Right? You don't want that stuff.
I mean, it was amazing to see these rivers going through to the sea. And if you come down into the river, there was a lot of vegetation and farming, and also really nice done farming with this drip planted lots of tomatoes and it was amazing what they actually did. But I mean, I would say millions of people. Yeah, and you see the woman with big belly and here one, big one, hand one, and lots of children. I think the medical situation is catastrophic there. And as you say, the war, you can see the war that was there for many years, and the people how they are living there. And I mean these motorbikes. I mean you see millions of motorbikes, millions of people. And I mean, even Lubango's got 3 million people, yeah, so more than Namibia in one city. That is amazing, you know. But it is so that there are so many possibilities to grow fruits and plants and gardens and get food in there. But it's small areas where they can do it. Okay, we were only in the western part, yeah, so that is more of the desert area. Ne? But yeah, it was interesting. It was just, and what they went through is how many years of war? 30 years? 35? It's a long time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then there's
dead people and what about happy people that have lost their homes and their lives and all that.
I mean, I was shocked about this Biodiversity, what the name is, with these gorges, where they told us this church there in front, that people went there to say goodbye to their people, and then they were loaded onto trucks and then put to the gorges, and then they were shot and shoveled down in these gorges, millions of them. But many. It was amazing. But
there's no doubt, Paul, that this country had gone through a tremendously bad time. Okay, and they struggled and suffered, and then on top of that, like, you know, we can go into the social and the political aspects of this whole thing and that sort of thing. That you know, they got the country got taken over by a ruling elite, right? And the country doesn't qualify for foreign aid out of Europe, okay? Because the per capita income of the country is higher than the minimum required to supply aid, right? But 90-something% of the population subsists on less than $1 US a day. Okay, so somebody's got the money, right? So let's not go there. I wanted to get you excited about the biology of this place. All the exciting things. And you know, I can tell you now that even those areas that you went to, some of the plants and animals and the birds and that sort of stuff, you go to those places, you go scratch around enough, you will find those things. It is such a beautiful country, and it is absolutely gorgeous, and the people are fantastic, man. We had such a good time during our time there.
Almost with in graphics book. It's exhausting, but it's tremendously beautiful. I've never seen such beauty. It's really in design. It's turn around there and it's quite a mankind. It's just beautiful.
Yeah.
It's nothing I've seen before. I mean, not that I've seen that much, but it's really worth going in the first person. So it's not easy to travel. It's a bit of a
No, I mean it's going to be slow, and you got to have patience.
trouble country.
Yeah, you got to have what? Yeah. I always say to people, when you go to Angola, just remember you got to have African Zen.
Yeah.
Right? And you don't have time, don't go to Angola. Right? Because everything is slow, and it's you know the best thing about leading Namibia to Angola is the fuel is super cheap. So the same thing about we have a place in the media called Ecology. If the fuel is available, the point really is that it's the most tremendous country from a biology point of view. If you're interested in ecology, evolution, biodiversity, all that sort of things, it's a place worth visiting and spending time looking in these slightly out of the way areas and that sort of stuff. Get hold of Brian Huntly's The Ecology of Angola. That book is written for the layperson. It's designed for first year university students with no knowledge. It's just being translated into Portuguese to go into the Angolan universities. All right. So the whole purpose of that book is that way. It gives you an idea of just how exciting and interesting the whole place is. Okay.
It was still mentioning John's book about the southwestern part of Angola.
You want to say that? 16 years. We led with lots of protests from me, but we had to move our kids to another school. But I would say that I think the rules are still that you only have to take a vehicle use for 30 days. Is that right? Okay, so now you can get an extension. Like in the past, it was difficult to get an extension. I would say from winter, a month would give you a lot of really good, a really good time. 3 weeks, you need to push a little bit into certain areas, but to get up into those tropical forests in the north, you either have to go up slowly and zoom back, or you zoom up and you come slowly back down. That's one of those things. There's no zoom. No, it's zooming. Zooming, right. It's not zooming. You're gonna 500 kilometers is going to take you 9 to 10 minutes. All right. Sometimes you'll find a piece of tar that's longer than 100 meters. Yes. We're winding up a little bit. There are reasonably good rides. Very far, no, but I don't know if you know Cynthia and Ryan's business on Africa south of the Sahara. That covers all the eventualities. All right, there are good lists for the country. Go to eBird to look to see where people have found birds in recent years. That's starting to pick up again. The dragonflies, you have to use Klaus Dijkstra's book on dragonflies it's West Africa, East Africa, Central Africa, but there's certain species that are missing. There are publications in scientific journals with all the listings of all the species. In fact, in Brian Huntley's book, there's a whole publication on dragonflies. The butterflies, there are lists of butterflies, but I know a guy who goes up there fairly regularly, and he's already found like 6 or 7 new species in science. And he's not a full-time, he's not a professional ornithologist, he's part of a hobby. So yeah, there are resources available, and it's increasingly well covered.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You round off. I'll try something for you. You feel right? So you feel so nice. Yeah, you're lucky more. Just want to say one thing. You know, what this talking was about is a celebration of life in Angola. And there are a lot of bad things in Angola. There's lots of tough stuff. But it's a country that you can celebrate. And the people have been through rough stuff. But, you know, so many people are so tough and happy and friendly. There's so much to celebrate. I think Chris has done a great job in sharing that celebration. Thank you.